So hi, this is Jishan from JC Tuition, and today we're going to have a quick run through on the basics of the autonomic nervous system. So the nervous system is split into the central compartment, or the central nervous system, which is comprised of our brain and our spinal cord, which runs inside of the vertebral column. And we also have our peripheral nervous system, which is in our periphery basically, and that's got the somatic division, which carries information from our central nervous system, from sort of our senses, and it also carries from our central nervous system to our skeletal muscles. There's also the autonomic division, which is what we're going to concern ourselves with today, and that regulates the internal environment of our bodies, carrying information from the central nervous system to organs, blood vessels, etc. So the autonomic nervous system is divided into two branches, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic is known as our rest and digest system. So as we can see, it sort of reduces our heart rate, it stimulates activity in our gastrointestinal tract, and so many other actions that you can pause and read on this slide. On the other hand, the sympathetic nervous system is known as our fight or flight system, where it stimulates systems as if we were being chased by a tiger, such as dilating our pupils, increasing our heart rate. So how does our somatic nervous system compare to our autonomic nervous system at a cellular level? Well, the somatic nervous system comprises of a single neuron, and it carries from the central nervous system to our effector organ. For instance, here it is releasing acetylcholine at the neuromuscular junction and causing contraction of the skeletal muscle. Okay. The autonomic nervous system has two neurons. It has a preganglionic and a postganglionic neuron. In the parasympathetic nervous system, acetylcholine is released at the ganglia, in the junction between the two neurons at the ganglion, and also at the effector site as well. Okay, and this can cause either a stimulatory or an inhibitory effect. But in the case of a heart, it slows our heart rate down. Yep, slows heart rate. The sympathetic nervous system also releases acetylcholine at the ganglion, at the synapse between the two neurons, but releases noradrenaline at the effector site to cause, for instance, an increase in heart rates. Okay, I'm just using the heart as an example, but if we go to the previous slide, we can see it has many other examples. It can stimulate or inhibit depending on the neurotransmitter and the receptors on the effector organs. The exception is for the sympathetic nervous system is where the preganglionic neuron releases acetylcholine and synapses directly onto the adrenal medulla. And the adrenal gland, the adrenal medulla to be specific, releases adrenaline and noradrenaline directly to the bloodstream, and this causes mass action in the body. So the adrenal medulla could be thought as a modified postganglionic organ. I've mentioned ganglia quite a lot, and the ganglia are basically just a cluster of cell bodies in glia with other sort of supportive tissue. So as mentioned on the last slide, whether the autonomic nervous system stimulates or inhibits certain actions is controlled by the receptor at the effector site. So we can target these receptors using medication. So for instance, we can slow the heart rate down by using medication to block these beta-1 adrenergic receptors. And these are called beta blockers. So the autonomic nervous system also has these general visceral sensory afferents. These take information from our internal sort of environment and carry it to nuclei, either in the brainstem here, or they can carry it to the hypothalamus in our brain, which is sort of involved with homeostasis. The information will then relay and send down efferents down the sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system down to the effector sites. It can also relay and act on our pituitary gland and cause endocrine hormonal changes in our body for mass action. The type of information the general visceral afferents may relay includes blood pressure, our body temperature, and also electrolyte balances. I've put this slide here to illustrate that these afferents that I've just mentioned do not have to travel all the way up to the CNS and relay back down to our nervous system to act, but there are also, at the local spinal level, there is a stimulus response, and which relays at that spinal level and causes a response, and this is known as our visceral reflex arc. Okay, so we will now look at the parasympathetic nervous system in more detail. So there are nerves that come from our brainstem. These are cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10. Alright? So cranial nerve 3 acts via the ciliary ganglion, and that acts on our pupils to constrict them. 7 acts via the pterygopalatine ganglion, and this acts on our lacrimal and salivary glands to increase tear and saliva production. 9 also acts on our salivary glands. So 10 is our vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve comprises for over 95% of our parasympathetic nervous system. The vagus nerve sort of wanders down from the brainstem to our visceral organs to form many plexi, such as the cardiac and pulmonary plexi, to work on our heart and respiratory system. The celiac plexus, which acts on our liver, gallbladder, stomach, or our hypogastric plexus down here, which sort of acts on our spleen, kidneys, small intestine, and the proximal part of our distal colon. Out of our sacrum, S2 to S4, we also have these pelvic splanchnic nerves. These act on our distal colon, our rectum, pelvis, viscera, and our external genitalia. Now, surgery for colorectal cancer may put these splenic nerves at risk, causing dysfunction of all these systems, including loss of urinary and bladder control. We will now look at the sympathetic nervous system in more detail. This is known as our thoracolumbar system, as it originates from T1 down to, so that's our first thoracic vertebra, to L2, or our second lumbar vertebra in our spinal cord. These preganglionic fibers coming from our spinal cord can synapse in paravertebral ganglia. This is a chain of ganglia known as our sympathetic trunk, which lie on either side of our vertebral column. So as you can see, they're sort of synapsing straight inside these paravertebral ganglia, or our sympathetic trunk. Alternatively, these preganglionic neurons can synapse in prevertebral ganglia, which pass all the way through, so all the way through the sympathetic chain, and synapse somewhere else, such as the celiac ganglion here. So as we can see, this fiber, for instance, passes, it doesn't synapse inside the sympathetic chain. It passes all the way through and synapses somewhere out here, and that's a prevertebral ganglia. Or, as mentioned earlier, it can pass all the way through and synapse directly on the adrenal gland. The sympathetic fibers that innervate our abdominal viscera are located in the prevertebral ganglia, such as the greater and lesser splanchnic nerves. These synapse on the celiac ganglion, and some pass through to synapse onto the superior mesenteric ganglion, which innervates our small intestine and the proximal part of our colon. There are also lumbar splanchnic nerves, which synapse on the post-ganglionic neurons in the inferior mesenteric ganglion, and this innervates the remainder of the colon, rectum, bladder, and genitals. To have the enteric nervous system, which, if you'd like, is the third branch of the autonomic nervous system, and this regulates our gastrointestinal function. It's an arrangement of two nerve plexi, which are basically a meshwork of afferents. So there's afferents here, the sensory nerves. There's also secretomotor neurons, so this neuron down here onto the secretor cells. And there are also just interneurons as well here. So this is the layers of the gut wall. Now the mesenteric plexus is between the longitudinal and circular muscles, and it acts on these muscles to basically control motility of the gut. There is also a submucosal plexus, and this acts in the submucosa, and this mainly acts to control secretion by secretory cells, and also the muscle actually here in this thin muscularis mucosa layer in the mucosa. And that is the autonomic nervous system in a nutshell for you. If you have any questions, please do leave them in the comment section, and please do also visit our website www.jctuition.net. All right, thank you.